He had his nose broken in camp before, and he continued to fight. So those are those things you cannot teach. Yo, this is Tribe with Yo Tribe Sports Bag, and I'm back at it again today with you, and we're getting into some sports. For those of you who have never joined this channel or watched what we do here, make sure you subscribe to the channel because this is the type of information you may just like. Let's help the algorithm. Let's spread this channel to others out there who like their sports the way that we bring it to you. So without further ado, you know why you're here. I know why you're here. You saw the thumbnail, and that thumbnail said Jake Paul versus Hasim Rahman Jr. That's right, they're finally getting it on after the bickering for the past couple of weeks, and I say couple of weeks really, because it hasn't been a whole camp, but they've been going back and forth, and the party line has been going back and forth, and everyone's been kind of sort of excited and kind of intrigued by what's about to happen, because they look at it as this is Jake Paul's first real fight. Now, is this really his first real fight? He's a professional boxer. He's been agreed upon by the commission to be a professional boxer. So how is that any different than anyone else who just decides to become a professional boxer? Of course, this is boxing, so things are pretty tribal. And of course, boxing fans do not like letting anyone into their boxing game, especially if you're just so-called a YouTuber and someone who doesn't have the so-called pedigree to be in the boxing game. That's just how boxing fans are. You know, you can't even agree to disagree. You just got to listen to what they say and combat it with something else that they've said. In any event, we can go back to Jake Paul fighting Tyron Woodley. See, because this is going to be the first fight he has against a fighter who has not been debuting or a fighter who is actually fighting. I mean, Tyron Woodley, he was an MMA guy or is an MMA guy. He's had 27 MMA fights. He's won 19 of them. And the thing about that is when you're in a combat sport, regardless if it's boxing or if it's MMA or if it's judo, whatever it is, you have the mindset of how to prepare for a fight. You know what it is when it comes down to the unexpected and preparing for the expected or the unexpected. The things that someone without experience may not be able to identify or be able to handle if the opportunity was in front of them. Like for instance, being able to go to the octagon or ring and you're so anxious, the anxiety overwhelms you on occasion to where it eats into your conditioning. All of these weeks that you might have put in for training and you felt good in sparring and you looked good in sparring, but when the moment actually hits you, that overwhelming anxiety can't eat into your conditioning, and after the first round you're probably exhausted, and then the mental part starts really caving in on you. I've seen it. I've done some amateur boxing in the past. I've been there, done that. You know, I wasn't overwhelmed by it, but I saw the differences from what I had done in the gym and what ended up happening in a ring. So things like that happen. I think any fighter who knows anything can tell you the same thing. Any trainer, any present fighter, past fighter, they can tell you the same thing. So let's get down to the myth of Jake Paul. Like I said earlier, he is a YouTuber. That's how we came to know who he was to begin with as a YouTuber. We looked at him as comedy relief. But when he decided to become a boxer, which is a dangerous sport, I think people frowned upon it. His people, the people who follow him, over 20 million followers, subscribers, they love him. They love him. They love that. But those aren't boxing fans. They're not even fringe boxing fans. They may know people who have big names like Mike Tyson, like Roy Jones, big names, but they don't know the real good boxers of the day. They couldn't tell you who Niue was at all. But anyways, see, he hasn't been given respect because he has that kind of a following. They think he's being handed opportunities, which I don't agree with. I think he's doing exactly what other fighters in his position have done in the past. And I'm talking about position-wise, experience. Not money-wise, not publicity-wise, but experience-wise. He's doing nothing different than what other fighters have done in the past. And I remember hearing about Mexican legend Juan Manuel Marquez talking about how he wants Jake Paul to fight a real fighter. What really qualifies as a real fighter, a real boxer? I mean, really, who determines who's a real boxer and who's not? It's not a fixed fight, so it's not going to be who's a fake boxer and who's a real boxer. They want to know, when is he going to fight a real boxer? Because I can go back in history and talk about certain fighters, and they were in the same boat, and they ended up having commendable careers. Buck Smith comes to mind when it comes down to that. I mean, this is a guy who had zero amateur experience. He just happened to be in the audience when a fight was supposed to happen, and the Ali Smith didn't show up, the guy that was supposed to be on the card, and they picked him out from the audience. He agreed to do it. I believe he got $50 for it in Oklahoma. All he did was have 120 KOs in his career, and he's faced some pretty solid fighters along the way. Very good fighters, legendary names. Julio Cesar Chavez is one of the fighters he fought. Of course, he lost, but he made boxing a career. So did that make him a real fighter? Mark Brealey was another fighter. Antonio Margarito was another fighter. So this guy's fought a lot of people, and he's gotten a lot of knockouts, because if you want to look at the record books, regardless of how he got there, his knockouts are up there with people like Archie Moore, legendary fighters. So you have to take it for what it is. But going back to being a real fighter, fake fighter, I don't understand that part right there. I mean, and I've been around boxing for a long time, so I don't understand that. I understand the tribal part about it. You don't want people on your territory. You don't want them intruding in your game and all that other stuff. But Jake Paul is doing nothing different than what these other fighters in the past that we call great now, or very good, what they've done when they were 5-0 or going to 5-0. If you have good management, you have the money to back yourself or get backed, you're going to be moved in a direction in which helps you cash out in the future, or helps you continue to make more cash as you move along, depending on your talent. And that's just how boxing's always been. Because Juan Manuel Marquez, in his 5th fight, he fought Roman Poblano, and Roman Poblano was 3-0-1. But at the end of both of their careers, well, Marquez is a Hall of Famer, and Poblano is 6-5-2. That's how he ended his career. So he wasn't exactly a real talented fighter that had aspirations to being a champion one day. He either realized he couldn't do it, he realized he wasn't good enough, and he did something different. That's just what it is. Nothing is wrong with that. Floyd Mayweather, I mean, come on. He fought Robert Abadak in his debut. Guess what? Robert was debuting himself. Floyd was coming off an Olympic appearance and a very established amateur career, and he fought this kind of a guy. Now, he won the fight, but this is what happens in boxing. A little bit later, Floyd fought Reggie Sanders, who was 1-1. Well, his career ends up 12-47-4. See, it's not knocking Floyd. This is how you go along nurturing a career in boxing. So this isn't anything new. We can go to Mike Tyson. You know, he started with 0-3 Hector Mercedes. That's the guy he started with. His debut fight, Hector Mercedes, was 0-3. Well, Hector Mercedes ends his career 1-10. This is boxing. Ricardo Spain, Mike fought him when he was 1-0. All Ricardo did was end his career 3-23-1. See, that's boxing. So what's wrong with someone without amateur experience? Because all of the guys I've mentioned, with the exception of Buck Smith, have had experience, amateur experience, coming into the fight game. So what makes a fighter a real fighter? What makes a fighter not a real fighter? So let's get down to Hasim Rahman Jr. See, the thing about Hasim Rahman Jr., I've been hearing that he has about 100 amateur fights. That's crazy, because outside of his name, I didn't hear anything about him, and I keep my ear to the ground when it comes down to boxing, whether it's amateur or pro, and I haven't heard about him winning national tournaments. I haven't heard about him winning a multitude of regional tournaments. He wasn't really one of those fighters that stood out. But he's had about 100 fighters, and if you listen to this channel and you listen to me break down boxing, you should also know I give a lot of credence to a amateur background, a very prolific amateur background, in which he has as a heavyweight in particular. Because as it stands, heavyweights, when they turn pro, they're not extremely skilled. They just happen to be bigger guys who can knock you out when they need to knock you out. At any time, if someone's 215 pounds, 200 pounds, they can probably knock you out if they catch you with the right shot. Now, the experience is going to set them up to be able to do it if they don't have the power to do it, but they can still be able to do it. See, and so I look at someone with experience, and I really look at it. Look at Lomachenko, his experience. You look at Usyk, his experience. These guys had very prolific amateur and established amateur careers. So when they came into the pro game, they didn't need a lot of fights in order to be world-class fighters. They had the pedigree, and they transitioned, and we see how they turn out to be right now. And even in that situation, Lomachenko ended up losing to Salido. And it just shows you the difference between the games. And as far as Hasim Rahman Jr. goes, you know, his weight. In his last fight, he fought Tommy Morrison's son, Kenzie Morrison. He was winning the first 4 rounds until he was KO'd in the 5th round. It might have been an early stoppage, but going by how long the fight would have gone, his tank seemed to have been empty. You know, because Morrison was just a tough guy, and he put that mental pressure on Hasim Rahman Jr. And he didn't have a lot of skill, but he was landing the shots that he did land as Hasim kept getting tired and more tired and more tired. And then ultimately he hit him, and he caught him, and he knocked him out. And well, Hasim Rahman Jr. lost the fight. So he showed that he had a skill set. He was winning with skill. But is he a front runner because he fell early, or is he lacking the conditioning? Because if you're lacking the conditioning at 224 pounds, you're being asked for this fight to come down to cruiserweight, which is 200 pounds. And then there's a rehydration clause. So going back to the fight he had with Mackenzie Morrison, we're talking about coming in the day of the weigh-in at 224. The day of the fight, you might have been over 230. Now you're being asked to go down to 200 pounds, and there's a rehydration clause, so you can't even just go up as much as you want because the weigh-in is over. This is the advantage that Jake Paul has in this fight. And this goes back to what I was saying about he has people around him now who know better. There's too much money involved for just anyone to take him or him to run his own career. He has real boxing people around him now. They know who to pick. They know what stories to leak. They know to talk about how so-and-so said that he shouldn't take the fight. They get the public thinking. But I see what's going on. If you're a matchmaker, you want that 60-40 opportunity in your favor. Well, they're not looking at Hasim Rahman Jr. because they don't believe that they can win. They're looking at him because of his name, first of all, instant notoriety, even if you're thinking about just his father. Secondly, he has boxing in his background. Now, I've mentioned 100 amateur fights or so, and now you look at what he's done. Even though he lost against Mackenzie, you see that he's fought as a pro. He's a real boxer. This is what Jake wants. He wants to get out of the shadows of not fighting real boxers. He wants to claim that he's definitely serious about this sport. He's been proving it, in my opinion. He's been proving it, that he's been serious about the sport. He's been doing what he's needed to do. He had his nose broken in camp before, and he continued to fight. So those are those things you cannot teach. And Jake Paul's group knows exactly what they are doing. If you check off everything that says it's going to be in his favor, you can just look at it. He has the fight with the name recognition, as I've mentioned. He has the 60-40 advantage, at least in the matchmaker's eye, because he didn't pick this fight himself. His people picked this fight. And the rehydration clause, we know that. Less than 8 weeks to prepare. We also know that as well. We know that it takes a real camp, and even then you're going to have a problem. So if you're having conditioning issues at 224 pounds, when you're asked to cut down to 200 and there's a rehydration clause, those issues will be compounded. And with that, I take Jake Paul to win the fight. I may be wrong, but at least I'm going out and saying, and I laid it out, why I believe that. Jake Paul will win the fight. Whether it's a knockout or not, I don't know. Going by the fatigue factor, I think it's possible. 8 rounds, and his previous fight, he was already stopped in the 5th round, where he was already showing signs of being fatigued at 224, which is more of his natural weight. At 200 pounds, probably fatigued even more, and the emotion of the event may add to that. I'm Trav with Yo Trav Sports Bag. Check us out on these other videos that you may see before you right now, because I dropped them. I don't know when I dropped them. I just dropped them. If something big is going on, regardless of the sport, I'm going to be there for you. Until next time.